died like a Christian, and every one of us can do that. We don't have to do something gigantic. This is the things that you become a saint through. If you die like a Christian, and he did that, if you offer up, this is the last topic of my book, of course, Die Well.
Probably the most controversial by modern standards, because today we have a category called euthanasia, which literally means good death.
Yes.
And what do they mean by the good death today? Suicide.
Wow. In fact, that is, you make a point. I never realized that euthanasia, of course, is die well. Okay, wow. Okay.
Quite the opposite of how we used to mean the term.
I would come with a painting. There are in the 15th, 16th century, there are quite a lot of paintings of Saint Christopher, the giant that carries Jesus on his shoulder across the water. Why are there so many paintings of Saint Christopher? He was considered to be the one who keeps you from a bad death. What was a bad death? A sudden death. Now, if you make a poll among people, how do you want to die? I would say 90% of the people would say quick without knowing, sudden without suffering.
Turn the lights off.
That was the contrary of a good death. In the Christian 16th century, a good death was one where you had the time to prepare yourself, where you even might suffer, but you might offer this up, which would ease your way to heaven when you died. So good death is neither a sudden death without warning in sleep, God please not, and it's neither being switched off by somebody. A good death is accepting what God sends your way with love, because this is the way you become a saint. And that may be a car crash, and that may be a long suffering in a hospital bed, carried with prayer, with love, and with acceptance. Mm-hmm. This is the way how you become a saint. And Blessed Carol did just that. And this is something that everyone can do. You don't have to be a superstar to do that. And most of all, that's a situation everybody will be in. It's one of the very few certainties in our life is that we're going to die, and also that we don't know how we're going to die. So this is a big topic in my book, and the story that touches me most among my ancestors, and well, she's not an ancestor, but members of my family, about a good death, is a story. I would like to tell that story. Is a story of Marie Antoinette's death.
A woman who was very unfairly maligned.
Who never said, "Let them eat cake."
Yeah, right.
This is one of those classical fake quotes that have been proven to be wrong, but will never go away because they are so wonderful, because they fulfill our prejudice. Marie Antoinette was not just Queen of France, but she was a Habsburg. She was the daughter of Maria Theresia, she of the 16 children. And she was married off to marry the Dauphin of France, the future King of France, the future Louis XVI. She was devout, instructed by her mother how to say her prayers. And she arrived in France, and I think it was a good marriage. She had a slightly superficial side. She was a bit vain. She wasn't wearing gym shoes like in the Sofia Coppola movie. But there was that. And she I think she enjoyed the court life quite a lot. But she was always a Catholic. And when then the revolution came and La Terreur came, and they were arrested and they were put in prison, and then her husband was decapitated under the guillotine, and then it was her turn. She suffered because she couldn't go to confession. The revolution wouldn't grant her a Catholic priest, because all Catholic priests in France, if they were caught, were killed immediately. So she couldn't have a Catholic priest visiting her to hear her confession. That for her was horrible, because she hadn't confessed for a while, and she didn't know if she was in a state of grace. Now just imagine if this is a priority in your life. You're not terrified of death, you're terrified of not being in a state of grace.
Right.
So she begged and she pleaded, and no, didn't give her a priest. And the story is so nice because we don't have it from her, but we have it from a very unsuspecting narrator. And it's a book that everybody should read once. It's written by Charles-Henri Sanson, and he was the executioner of Paris from an old dynasty of executioners. And he wrote a book about La Terreur, about all the people whose heads he cut off with the guillotine, Robespierre, all the revolutionary, and also her. It always describes like how I came to get them, how we drove on our little cart through the cobblestone streets of Paris, and what they said during those few minutes until we got to the guillotine, and how they died. How they died is always the same. You get laid down and
Chop, chop.
so yeah, chop, chop. So with her, he was sitting beside her, and that's a moment, by the way, that has been captured by David, by the famous painter. There is a sketch of her when she rolled by, hands tied behind her back, with her hair rather short. And Sanson said she was incredibly nervous and unhappy and looking around all the time at the houses and really, truly unhappy. And he didn't understand why. Well, of course. And then
At least one reason.
they drove past one house, and she looked up, and she was in peace. And she remained in peace all the way to the guillotine, serene, happy, and in peace. She walked up the steps to the guillotine. She accidentally stepped on his foot. She said, "Pardon, excusez-moi, monsieur." That was her last words, and then she was killed. And Sanson never understood what happened, so he went back and he looked at the house. And after the revolution, underground Catholics told him what had happened. And that's incredible. Catholics knew that she had begged for a priest and never got one. So they sent her a message into the prison that at a certain point on the trip, in a certain house, but she didn't know which one, at one window, they would smuggle in a Catholic bishop, and he would give her an absolution in extremis. She saw him, and everything was good. And why do I tell this story? Just to tell you that even when Habsburgs were superficial, they had their priorities right. And being in a state of grace when you die is a priority that's really important. And in my book, you will find other stories of that kind. And that's why I think the chapter 7, Die Well, is the most important chapter in my book. And I could have put it first because it really shaped the lives of most of the Habsburg emperors. Not all, a few of them, unfortunately, didn't take this so serious. And we know this, unfortunately. It's very sad. We have to pray for them. But most of them did.
I can't help but notice